Hello and welcome. I'm Carmen Geddes and so excited to be here with you today. We are going to be making Christmas stockings. And as you can see, I like big Christmas stockings. We like to stuff them with so much goodness. But the other thing I love about holiday projects in general is these holidays just come back every year. So any time of the year is a good time to start Christmas stockings. Mostly what I want to talk about in our demo today is creating the fabric to make your stocking. Because you can see the size and shape of my preferred Christmas stockings, but maybe you like a different one. And so we're going to talk about creating the fabric for these stockings first off. And as you can see, the project today, we are working with 2.5-inch squares, and nothing is more wonderful than these beautiful 2.5-inch strips cut up in these roly-polies. You get all the fabrics in the beautiful fabric lines, and then of course you can add more to that if you want, but oh my goodness, I just can't say enough about how fun it is to work with pre-cuts, because 99% of the thought process is already done for you. So what I wanted to also point out, the project we're doing today is going to be all squares, but you'll notice on a couple of the stockings we have brought in half square triangles and bringing in that whole different look to the stockings. We're going to talk about adding a cuff to stockings. This one just has a binding on the top. And so really the bottom line is this project is all about you, and you're going to bring out your creative juices and make this just how you want it. Now, instead of piecing traditionally, we are actually going to be piecing our squares on this lightweight iron-on foundation called Easy Piecing Grid. Now, actually, the one that I'm showing you is our 1-inch finished. So you'll see how these squares are printed in 1.5-inch squares. Now, the panel that we are using for our project today is the 2-inch finished. It's just so much bigger. That little one is easy to show. So this is our panel, and I've cut all of the squares, I've cut all those strips into 2.5-inch squares. And then this is where the fun is. This is where you get to be creative. One of my favorite things to do with large prints are these little fussy cuts. I mean, so you've got Santa peeking around the square on this side, and I just love that. Also, you can have a lot of fun with just directional fabrics, like the fabrics that have words written on them. And so this is supposed to be the fun part for you. Now, this is very scrappy, and so I don't have any rhyme or reason to the design, but you really want to be creative here. And so there are several videos on this channel talking about Easy Piecing Grid, and you can just search for Carmen Geddes if you want more information on how to piece with this. But essentially, we're going to lay all the squares out. We're going to give this a very good pressing so they are nice and secure. And then when all these are where you want, then we're going to just fold it on the fold line and sew the 1/4-inch seam. And then fold it on that fold line and sew your 1/4-inch seam. And you're going to sew through the panel in one direction, and then we're going to sew through the panel in the other direction. And so what you're going to end up with is this beautiful pieced fabric, right? And so let me show you the back. So see how that is all pieced. We've done a little bit of clipping, so seam allowances are going the opposite direction. I like to use steam, but this is what you're going to end up with, is this beautiful fabric to cut your stockings out of. Now, I've used this exact size because the pattern I'm using is actually my pattern that you can find on my website. On Riley Blake's website, you go to free patterns, and they have a different stocking pattern that's a free download. Or you might like to draw your own, or any number of sources to actually get a stocking pattern, okay? So this size fabric works perfect for my pattern. But if you were doing maybe a longer, skinnier stocking, or any different size, you're going to just create a bigger piece of fabric. Now, I love to be efficient with my piecing and my cutting, and so this size fabric will actually cut out 2 stocking fronts. So that's actually one thing I want to just point out. On this stocking, I've got the pieced on the front, and then look at that cute fabric. And so I love using some of these darling bigger prints for the back because it's going to be, against the fireplace. And so, but you can do piecing for the front and the back if you want to. But one thing that is very, very important is when you're cutting out, let's say you're making 5 stockings and you want them all to be facing the same direction. When you're cutting out your pattern piece, you want to make sure, so when I have this laid here, the front of my stocking, see the right side is up, the front of my stocking is going to be pointing left. And so if I turned this over and did it on the other side, it would be going the wrong way. So if you're going to be cutting out multiple fronts, you want them all to go the same way. My little rule of thumb is I want the right side of my pieced fabric so I can see it. I want it up, and then I want the right side of my pattern. So the printed part of my pattern, I want to see that. So then I know that it's going to be facing left. Now, this particular piece of fabric works perfect for one to be cut out this way, and then if I turned it here, it's going to cut out another one, and then notice that's going to the left. It's almost like I planned it this way. So you're going to cut out your stocking front, and I do all of this before I cut out the other parts of the stocking. And the reason for that is that I'm actually using, I've got this right here. So here is my stocking front. So I'm actually going to use this cut out piece for I can use it for the pattern for the back and the lining if I want to, if it turns out any different than my paper pattern. So I've got my stocking front, and then I've got the stocking back, and we do want those to be able to go right sides together when you cut those out. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is that I have fused a very lightweight, it's a fusible batting. Now you can use anything you want, but I really like that to have that little extra body and stability. So I really like the fusible batting. It's very lightweight, fuses nicely. I put that on the back, and I've also put it on the front. Now, before I put these together, if I want to do anything, if I want to do some quilting on the front of my stocking, this is the time to do it. In fact, I might do it before I've trimmed this right to the stocking shape in case it shifts at all. But with that fusible, it really doesn't really move or shift. But this is a really fun time to practice some little quilting, or you can do that by hand. Great time to do that embellishment. And so now you're cutting out your front and the back, and then you're also going to cut out your 2 lining pieces. Now those need to be able to be right sides together, right? And so I just had them wrong sides together so you could see how cute the fabric was. And so we're gonna put those together, and now we're gonna sew these up. Now just remember, we're gonna sew all around this stocking except the opening. Don't get too excited and sew that opening shut. So let's do a few little clips in here, and some glasses are always going to help, and you don't need too many. That fabric kind of likes to stick together. You have a little bit of smoothing, and now typically when we're doing regular piecing, we think about piecing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But I'm going to take this, I'm going to call this a very full 1/4 inch seam allowance, okay? We're going to take a little bit more healthy seam allowance on this. Because we've cut right through all these piece blocks, they're not going to need to match up. I just really want to make sure that all of the edges are caught and nice and secure. And so we'll like to do a nice little back stitch. So a nice little back stitch at the opening of that. Now we're going to take the lining and let's get those two together. Sometimes I will even, press these together. It kind of helps them stay, but I think these are going to stay together really well. Just a few little clips. I've whined for years. I do not like to poke myself with pins, and so the genius that invented these little clips is just right up there in my book. So these were cut out, exactly the same, so we're going to just sew them with the same seam allowance. Right sides together. Okay, so we've got our stocking body sewn up and this. And so the next thing that we're going to talk about is the little tab, right? Because we want these to hang up. And so I just took one of the 2.5-inch strips from the roly-poly, and I've just folded each side over. You can use a little starch, and then we're going to just fold that one more time and do a little top stitch. So simply, you're just going to end up with this nice little tab. You can make this as long or short as you want to. And so that part is done. And so now let's talk about the cuff for just a second here. I'm going to turn our stocking right side out. Now you can do a little bit of trimming up in here if you would like to, but we're going to turn this nice. So much cuter when it's the right side out. I like to kind of just run my hand along the seam, fingers, kind of get your fingers in here and push that seam out a little bit. It really helps give you a nice front and back. And run your fingers along there. And we can give that a little press too also. Isn't that fun? So that's got the nice fusible batting on there. I mean, this has just got a really nice little substantial feel to it and just turned out darling. Okay, so the cuff, let's lay this here so we can see this. The cuff can be as tall, I guess as tall as you would like it to be. My cuff is cut at about 10 inches this way. But the length of this cuff basically is going to be determined by how wide the opening of your stocking is, okay? And so that's why I like the stocking to already be sewn. And then I'm going to, let's put it in the middle here. So I'm measuring my cuff to make sure that's all nice and pushed out. So I'm getting it accurate. So it is basically the width of that cuff plus a seam allowance. And so sometimes a pattern will give you a specific measurement, but depending on your seam allowances, that can change. And so if you do this little measurement before you cut that cuff, then that's going to save you a lot of headache. So then you're going to sew those two long ends together of your cuff, and we're going to fold it in half. And make sure all those raw edges are together. You can give it a little press at this point. Make that nice. Now one thing I'm going to show you this way. If I ever want to add a name to this cuff, so like we've got Grant back here on this cuff, so you can do this really fun with fusible letters, or you can do it with embroidery. But I kind of need to see things visually, so I kind of want to show you what I like to do before I actually sew this cuff in. because of course we're going to add that name before. I'm going to tuck the cuff in because it's going to be sewn on and then flipped around. So I've got my seam of my cuff on the back seam of the stocking, and this is, I'm not sewing it in right now, I'm just giving myself a visual of where am I putting this name on this big piece of fabric. And so I know that this is going to be where I sew it. It's going to flip around, so I know that this is the spot that I want to put the cuff. So you can do it with a little water-soluble pen, but then I know that, okay, and pretend this seam was not sewn yet. So now I know on this bigger piece of fabric that this is the spot, and it's going to be centered right here, and knowing there's going to be seam allowance, this is where I need to put that name. And so hopefully that makes sense to you. I like to do this before I sew the cuff up, and I forgot to tell you that part. But if you're like me, you're going to sew it in wrong, and then you're going to take it out, and then you're going to fix it. So it's okay. All right, so let's put this together. So we've got the body of our stocking, the front and the back is all done. We sewed our lining right sides together. Now this does not get turned inside out because we want that cute lining fabric to show. So we're just going to tuck this down into the stocking and match these raw edges along the top. Give it a little shake down in there, and do a few little clips around. Yeah, they're gonna love these clips. Just put in a few little clips, and I'll tell you, the lining, this whole raw edge along the top is going to be completely hidden when you sew the cuff on or when you bind it. And so be really nice to yourself as you are sewing these. If for some reason maybe your lining turned out just a tiny bit bigger, then just put a little tuck in it or take it out and re-sew it. But this stocking doesn't actually have to fit anybody. It just needs to be sewn well and look super cute, and that's exactly what's going to happen. All right, so now we've got the front and the back. Now when we put let me get my little sample here. When we sew the cuff, when we sew the cuff on and we wrap that around, we want this cute tab to be right here between the lining and the cuff. And so the tab is going to be sewn down. Let me open this up so you can see. So the tab, we're going to have these raw edges. I kind of just like to do almost like a little, they can be right next to each other. You can do a little crisscross here. I'm just going to put them basically right next to each other. And so we want the tab to be down. Now, one thing I will say, that if you would like to at this point, you can take this over and just sew the tab down, with just a single little stitch, just so it's nice and secure. And in fact, I think I'm just going to do that, right? So let's just take this over real quick. This is just going to be a lot more secure than just a clip or a pin, because we're going to be covering it up with the cuff. And so just doing a little quick, see, that was well worth the time. So just doing a quick little stitch just to secure that little tab down. Now we don't even have to worry about it. So we've got our cuff folded in half, right? And we've got the seam of the cuff. Since it's folded in half, they're both right sides, so we're going to take, let's get this here, there we go. So we're going to take this cuff and we're going to match the seam of the cuff with the back seam of the stocking. Now this is where a clip is going to be very handy. And we're going to line all of these up. Now, Again, you want to be really nice to yourself as you're assembling all of these, and because if these edges aren't matching up exactly perfect, you want to just do the best you can to get them all lined up, because the bottom line is we want all this to be caught in the seam, right? So now when we are taking this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all around here, we're going to take a nice width of presser foot. Okay, so this would be more of a 5/8 inch seam allowance, okay? Not a 1/4 inch, because we want all of this to be caught in the seam allowance. Now I'm starting in the back where the tabs are, and you want to go a little bit slow. This is a little bit more bulky. Sometimes just for good measure, I like to just do a little back stitch, right? Because like I was saying earlier, we put a lot of stuff in these stockings, and so they can be pretty heavy. And so we're just going to go along. You know, again, you can kind of make sure those are all matched up. And all the way around. Okay, so now we are going to just pull that cuff out, give it a good shake, fold that right over the edge. Now, of course, you can give this a nice little press if you want. We're going to line this up so it's matching up with our cute little squares. But isn't that so fun? So lickety split. You've got a wonderful Christmas stocking. You can personalize these to each person in your family. You can use lots of different size squares. One of the ones back here, the one on the left in the back, is 1.5 inch finish, so starting with 2 inch squares. So the sky is the limit, but the main thing is beautiful, darling holiday cheer. So I hope that this gives you some fun ideas for your holiday, for your Christmas stocking projects. And the only thing you got to do is just start cutting out those squares. So if you want to find out more about me, you can go to tensisters.com. Again, if you search this channel with my name, you'll find other videos with lots of great tutorials. And so thank you so much for joining me, and Merry Christmas all year long.